In this lesson, we're going to learn how we can start to control the rendered appearance of our particles inside of Maya. Alright, so up until this point, we've really just sort of been focusing on the overall dynamic behavior of our scenes and really not focusing at all on the rendered appearance. Now, when it comes to controlling the rendered appearance, there are some really important things that we need to keep in mind. So, for example, if I were to go to a frame where we can actually start to see these particles, and if I try to render this out, you can see that if we render these in Mental Ray, we do start to get just some little gray dots. Now, if we render these in something like Maya software, you'll notice that these particles completely disappear. And it really doesn't have anything to do with Maya software itself or any of the render settings. It just happens to be that the default particle type can actually not be rendered inside of Maya software. So if we go back to Mental Ray, which is what we'll be using for our final render, so we'll go ahead and just switch to that at this point. Again, we do see these little dots in here. So let's start to control the appearance of these and start to get maybe something that is a little bit more gaseous in appearance. So I'm going to press Control A on my keyboard, and to control the actual appearance of these particles, a lot of this is going to be done inside the Particle Shape tab. So in this particle shape, we're going to scroll down and look for the render attributes. Right now this is set to points. So if you take a look, there's actually several different types that we can choose from. Now there's a few toward the bottom that have this S/W next to them. That means that these are particle types that can be rendered in Maya software. Okay, so if we were to go ahead and go back to my render view, again, if we rendered Maya software, these are the only particle types that can be rendered with Maya software. Most of these other types cannot. Okay, so let's go back to Mental Ray. In this case, I'm going to switch this to something like a cloud type. Again, a cloud is going to be really good for giving us sort of this gaseous type appearance. So if we go back and play this through, let this get to a certain point, there we go, we start to have these particles in here. And if we render this out, we should start to see these tiny little blue dots. Okay, now let's first start by making these particles a little bit larger. So once we switch this to a cloud, we can now choose this button that says that we can now start to add attributes for that current render type, which is, in this case, a cloud. So if we want these dots to be a little bit larger, this is where we can start to control the radius. So as we start to dial this up, this is one of the few attributes that we can actually adjust and get a little bit of interactive feedback here. So for the radius, let's start to dial this up. And in my case, I'm looking for maybe something between 10 and 15. That should work in my case. Again, every scene is going to be a little bit different. So the overall radius for your scenes may be significantly different, or maybe just even slightly different. Okay, now if we render this out, we should start to see definitely some larger, sort of more gaseous particles in here. Now, one of the things that we have is that these particles at this point are pretty much all the exact same size. And I really don't want that. What I would really need is for these particles to probably start out small as they get toward the base. And as these gas particles start to expand and sort of linger, they're probably going to start to spread out and get a little bit larger. Now these clouds, again, they're a perfect particle type to simulate this type of behavior. And what's nice about when we start to get into some of these other particle attributes, we can actually start to create some particle behaviors that don't currently exist. So let's say we wanted to set up some sort of an attribute or some sort of a setting where these particles start off a certain size when they're born, but as they start to grow older, they get larger and larger. Well, we can actually do exactly that. So let's start by going in and adding a dynamic attribute to these particles. So let's go to General, and let's go to the Particle tab for this. And what we're going to look for is a radius setting. So we can set this to radius per particle. With that done, press OK, and there we go. Now you can see this radius per particle has been added in here, and now we can start to make some kind of a control that will adjust the radius of our size, or adjust the radius of our particle based on its age. Now, here's something that's really important for you to remember. In order for this to work properly, we have to make sure that our particles actually die off at some point. because this per particle attribute is based on the particle's life. So always need to make sure, if we go back to our lifespan mode, you can see that we do have the lifespan set to something other than live forever. Okay, if it's set to live forever, what we're about to do won't work. So let's scroll down. Let's go to our radius per particle. Let's right-click, and we could make an expression to drive this, but I find that, being a visual person, I find that you can actually get every bit as nice a result by using a ramp. Okay, now to edit this, let's right-click and edit ramp. So essentially now, this ramp is driving the overall size of these particles. So if I get to a point here, you can see the particles start off a certain size, and then they're actually getting smaller as time goes on. And it's using the black and white values of this ramp to drive that. So the particles start off a certain size, and then as they start to age and reach the end of their life, they start to shrink down to pretty much a point of 0. Now, what I want to do instead is have the particles start off a certain size and then actually get larger as time goes on. So what I'll do is start by clicking this little bottom swatch down here, this little circular area. Let's click on that. And for this value right over here, I'm going to set this maybe to something like 5. And that will set my particle radius up to a certain size when they're born, and you can see that right here. If we want, we can start to add in new swatches by just simply clicking in here and start to control that ramp. If we have any of these swatches that we want to take out, just click on the little box over here on the opposite side, and that will remove that swatch. Now again, I want these particles to get a little bit larger as they get older, so I'm going to click on this black swatch up here. Go ahead and call that up, and for my value, I'll set this maybe up to something like 30. Okay, and now rewind. Let this play through. There we go, very nice. So now you can see again these particles start off nice and small, and then as they start to get older, they start to get a little bit larger. If I were to render this out, very nice. We can see exactly the result that we would expect. So what we'll start to do in our next lesson now is continue focusing on the rendered appearance of these particles, but we'll start to focus on how we can start to get rid of this sort of a blue appearance, and again start to get something that looks much more gaseous and sort of cloud-like, if you could say that for lack of a better word.